The sound of the crowd fades faster than most men expect. You think it lingers, that roar, that rush, but in truth, it vanishes the moment the whistle blows. What's left behind isn't noise or glory, it's the quiet. The kind that echoes through the empty locker room when the pads come off and the truth settles in. You're not indispensable. You're under contract. I've seen it happen again and again. Men who believed they were protected by paper. Promises written in ink that seemed to carry the weight of certainty. But paper burns easily. And in the world of professional football, contracts are built not to shield the players who sign them, but to protect the machine that needs them only as long as they can perform. That's the secret no one wants to face when the crowd goes silent. The contract isn't a reward, it's a leash. And every clause, every line of legal language is designed to remind a player exactly where he stands, at the edge of power, but never holding it. There's a strange kind of poetry to it. The moment the lights fade and a man realizes the field he once ruled has already replaced him, he walks away thinking he's still negotiating, still in control. But somewhere in the owner's office, his future was already decided the moment he limped off that field. Because in this game, injury isn't misfortune, it's expiration. You can trace it back through decades of history, each generation learning the lesson the hard way. In the 1970s, players like Conrad Dobler fought through pain for contracts that barely covered their surgeries. In the 1990s, stars like Sterling Sharp were told they'd get another chance until their bodies disagreed. And in the modern era, even with agents, lawyers, and collective bargaining, the quiet truth remains the same. Almost no contract in the NFL is guaranteed. That's the unspoken sentence hanging over every man who signs his name. You can give everything, your time, your body, your mind, and still walk away with nothing but the echo of the crowd and a headline that reads, "Released." They tell you it's business. They tell you the money is fair, the system is balanced, the opportunities endless. But deep down, every veteran knows there's a darker reality hiding beneath the handshake, the idea that the moment your value drops, your worth is rewritten. The ink dries, the cheers fade, and suddenly you're not a player anymore. You're an expense. I remember a running back once told me, every snap is an audition for survival. He wasn't exaggerating. His contract promised 2 more years, but a knee injury changed that overnight. 1 MRI later, the team invoked a clause that voided his guarantees. He was gone before he could even clean out his locker. His family found out on the news ticker at the bottom of the screen. That's the NFL, a billion-dollar league built on non-guaranteed dreams. The irony is that these contracts are sold as securities, protection against uncertainty. But they're not written for the players. They're written for the teams, for the accountants, for the invisible layer of legal architects who know how to turn loyalty into liability. Every clause has a purpose, and that purpose is control. Control over movement. Control over speech. Control over identity. Because when a player signs, he doesn't just commit to a team, he commits to silence. Speak out about your deal, and you'll be labeled difficult. Demand transparency, and you'll be called ungrateful. The game teaches compliance long before it teaches courage. Some of the greatest players in history found this out too late. Take the countless men who believed they de-earned lifetime loyalty, who played through pain because they thought their contract guaranteed another chance. But loyalty isn't written into paper, it's written into convenience. And once you're inconvenient, you're invisible. The most haunting part of this system isn't the money, it's the illusion of it. See the headlines, a 4-year deal, $60 million. They don't see the fine print, only $10 million guaranteed. Incentives nearly unreachable, back-end years meant for headlines, not reality. The average NFL career lasts less than 4 years. Most never see the money their contract advertises. The players know it, the agents know it, the league knows it. And still, the cycle continues, because hope is the most powerful illusion of all. In locker rooms, you hear it whispered, the phrase that no one wants on their lips. Final season, it's the unspoken code for when a man realizes he has been written out of the story before the last page is even turned. The coaches might still call his name. The crowd might still chant it. But somewhere in the office upstairs, the decision's already been made. He's too expensive, too injured, too old. The final season isn't when a player retires. It's when the team quietly moves on. We've seen that silence firsthand, the hollow look of a man realizing the contract he trusted was never meant to protect him. That moment when the promise of millions shrinks to a final paycheck that doesn't cover the damage he'll carry for life. The NFL doesn't send condolences when your knees give out. They send accountants. We like to tell ourselves it's a fair trade, money for risk, fame for sacrifice. But that logic only works if the men at the center of it understand the deal they truly making. And most don't, because the system was built to hide the truth behind complex language and endless clauses. Injuries become failures to perform. Loyalty becomes cap management. And the only constant is the contract, the document. That ensures the team always wins first. The men who step onto that field every Sunday aren't just athletes. They're assets negotiated, leveraged, and replaced. And for every star whose name ends up on a billboard, there are hundreds whose signatures became their undoing. That's the tragedy the cameras never show. The quiet aftermath when the roar dies. When the ink has dried, and when the truth about the contract comes due. The modern player understands more now than ever before. They hire lawyers, study clauses, fight for guarantees. But even now, the balance of power remains lopsided. Teams can restructure, void, or release at will, often before a player's guaranteed portion even clears. In any other industry, that would be breach of trust. In football, it's business as usual. Maybe that's why the silence after the whistle feels so heavy. Because every man who's ever played this game knows, somewhere deep down, that the sound of the crowd is the loudest lie of all. It tells you you're untouchable, right? Until the moment you're not. And when the cheering fades and the stadium empties, all that remains is a memory of a promise that was never real to begin with. Some call it the price of greatness. Others call it survival. But in truth, it's the cost of illusion, the quiet, unseen side of the NFL, where contracts are as fragile as the men who sign them. And when the final season comes, when the ink has dried and the lights go out, that's when the game shows its true face. Cold, calculated, unforgiving. This isn't the story of football's glory. It's the story of its debts, the ones written in fine print and paid in silence. Because behind every championship, every handshake, every contract extension, there's a line that no one reads and a truth that no one wants to face. And that's where this story begins. The business of football didn't begin with million-dollar contracts or luxury boxes. It began with a handshake, a promise, and a piece of paper that looked more like a favor than a future. In the earliest days of the league, the idea of a player's contract wasn't about protection or partnership, it was about control. The teams owned the ink, and the players signed whatever kept food on the table. Back in the 1920s, an NFL deal was often a one-page note scribbled by a club owner. It might promise a few $100s per game. No insurance, no guarantees, and no clarity about what happened if you got hurt. That was the entire understanding. You play until you can't, and when you can't, you're done. The reserve clause, the invisible chain that tied a player to his team, indefinitely ensured no one could test the market, no matter how good they were. A player didn't just sign for a season, he signed away his right to leave. It wasn't until 1946 that the seeds of resistance started to form. The All-America Football Conference, a rival league, offered players better pay and new opportunities. For the first time, athletes realized they had leverage. Yet, even then, the contracts were written in a language few could understand. Most of them didn't have lawyers. They didn't know what clauses like at-will, termination, or injury waiver really meant. As one veteran once said, "We played for respect." The money just helped you forget how much it hurt. By the 1950s, the NFL had grown into a national pastime, but the structure of control remained. Players were property assets managed by a front office that answered only to ownership. The league called it competitive balance. The truth was simpler. It was a business built on silence. Those who questioned it were labeled troublemakers. And in a sport where careers lasted only a few years, few dared to speak up. The first cracks in the foundation came from courage, not contracts. In 1956, the players formed their first union, the NFLPA. It wasn't born from comfort. It was born from pain. They demanded basics: minimum salary, medical care, pensions, simple dignity. The owners resisted every inch. Decades later, John Mackey, Hall of Fame tight end and one of the early union leaders, reflected on that era. "We weren't fighting for luxury," he said. "We were fighting for fairness." Still, fairness had a price. The owners learned to evolve, to make concessions that looked like progress but preserved the same imbalance. Non-guaranteed contracts became the quiet weapon of the modern NFL. They offered the illusion of freedom, big numbers for headlines, but the risk stayed with the players. You could be cut at any moment, and the team owed you nothing. The business of football had discovered a genius loophole: the promise of money without the obligation to pay it. The reserve clause eventually died, but its spirit didn't. It lived on in mechanisms like the franchise tag, the transition tag, and team options. Tools that, by legal design, kept players bound even in an age of supposed free agency. When Reggie White challenged the system in the early 1990s, it shook the league to its core. His lawsuit forced a settlement that allowed true free agency. But even then, the structure of control didn't disappear, just adapted. The language became more complex, the legal armor more polished, the traps harder to see. Behind every page of every contract was an army of lawyers. Each line designed not to protect both sides, but to shield the league from liability and ensure predictable control over the workforce. Players were told they had choice, but choice means little when the market is owned by 32 billionaires and every opportunity runs through them. The average player today signs his first contract before his 24th birthday. It's a dream come true and a deal already tilted against him. Rookie deals under the collective bargaining agreement are slotted, structured, and capped. They guarantee modest signing bonuses, but little long-term protection. The clock starts ticking from day one. The league knows that most won't make it to their second deal. Statistically, the average career lasts just over 3 years. Most never reach free agency, never negotiate true market value, never see the life-changing money fans assume they've earned. The fans read headlines, 4-year deal worth $80 million, and believe it's real. The truth is often closer to $12 million guaranteed, with the rest tied to performance incentives and team options. Those incentives depend on playing time, production, and even team performance factors often outside a player's control. One missed game, one scheme change, one injury, and millions vanish overnight. When former linebacker Lorenzo Alexander reflected on this system, he said, "The contract numbers are smoke and mirrors. They sell a dream to the fans and a gamble to the players." His words cut deep because they're true. The modern NFL has perfected a public illusion of financial theater, where numbers dazzle but accountability disappears. And beneath that illusion is a culture of fear. Players learn quickly not to question the system. Speak out, and your reputation becomes a liability. The same front offices that smile at press conferences will quietly blacklist anyone seen as a problem. The message is clear. Play your role, stay quiet, sign the paper. The machine rewards compliance and erases dissent. Over time, this silence becomes part of the league's DNA. The NFL's public image thrives on spectacle and stability values, incompatible with the chaos of contract disputes. The league markets unity while enforcing hierarchy. It celebrates team-first culture while treating players as replaceable components. The contradiction is elegant, efficient, and devastatingly effective. Yet, even in the face of this, there have been moments of rebellion, players who refuse to stay quiet. In 2018, Le'Veon Bell sat out an entire season rather than play under the franchise tag. "I had to make a stand," he said. "They'll use you until they can't. I wanted them to know I had a choice." His decision cost him millions, but exposed a deeper truth, that the NFL's most lucrative contracts can also be cages. To understand how this system persists, you have to see the machinery behind it: the owners, the front offices, the legal teams, and the unions that balance on the edge of compromise. Every collective bargaining agreement since the 1970s has been a chess match between power and survival. Each one promises progress, but hides concessions. Players win headlines, but owners keep leverage. The 2011 CBA, hailed as a victory for player safety and revenue sharing, quietly extended the league's control over contract structures. It reinforced non-guaranteed salaries, preserved the franchise tag, and capped rookie deals. The latest agreement, signed in 2020, offered minor pay bumps but did little to challenge the fundamental imbalance. The players got more comfort. The league kept the keys. There is an old saying in locker rooms: "You re not paid for what you v de new repaid for what they think you'll do." That belief drives every negotiation, every clause, every conversation about worth. A torn ligament can erase a decade of loyalty. A bad season can turn a captain into a casualty. And when that happens, the system doesn't pause, just moves on. The darker side of this economy isn't the needs, the manipulation of hope. The system depends on belief that every player thinks he's the exception, that he'll beat the odds, that the contract in front of him is different. It's what keeps them signing, training, and sacrificing. Hope is the most profitable currency in sports, and the NFL mints it daily. The shadow economy of football isn't just about salaries or bonuses. It's about who controls the narrative of value. It's about deferred payments, hidden conditions, post-career medical fights, and legal loopholes that turn millionaires into plaintiffs. It's about the gap between what's promised and what's delivered. In this world, perception is power. The league projects fairness and order while quietly writing rules that ensure the balance never shifts too far. The players' union fights for better terms, but even its victories come with compromise. The owners have time, lawyers, and wealth. The players have bodies that break and clocks that run out. There's a pattern in the history of every great sports empire. Progress arrives only when the pain becomes public. The NFL's contract system has survived decades of scrutiny because it hides behind complexity. It's not corruption, it's design. Every clause, every arbitration, every team-friendly deal is part of a structure that keeps control centralized and accountability minimal. That's the story NFL's contract secrets. Players left in the shadows will expose the quiet manipulations, the financial traps, the ethical gray zones where loyalty collides with profit. This is not a story about villains or victims. It's about the cost of a system built to reward power and punish vulnerability. It's about the men who played the game better than anyone and still lost to the fine print. We'll journey through the decades, from the first one-page contracts to the billion-dollar deals of today, to uncover how the business of football evolved into a legal labyrinth. We'll hear from those who fought back, those who stayed silent, and those who still believe in the promise despite the pain. Because understanding the game behind the game is the only way to see the truth behind the scoreboard. This isn't just about money, it's about trust. And trust in the NFL is the most fragile contract of all. In football, the field is supposed to decide everything. That's the mythology. You earn your place under the lights by the way you hit, how fast you run, how long you last. But inside the NFL, the truth is colder and quieter. It's written in the paper before a single snap is taken. The real game, the one that decides whether you're a millionaire or forgotten, is played in offices lined with framed jerseys and conference tables made of oak. It's a game of language, clauses, and timing. The player thinks his signature seals his future. What he doesn't realize is that it seals his limits. I remember reading one contract that stretched nearly 40 pages, 38 of them written in legal code so dense you could feel the lawyer's smirk behind it. Guaranteed, vested, active roster bonus. Offset language, each term sounded like protection until it wasn't. Every line was designed to look like an offer, but many were traps disguised as opportunity. It was the quietest kind of competition, the player versus the paragraph. Ask any veteran who's been cut a day before his guarantee locked in, and you'll hear the same hollow laugh. It's the moment they learn the system wasn't built for their protection. The NFL's contract structure rewards management for knowing the loopholes better than the players ever will. Because inside the fine print lives a billion-dollar firewall, one that keeps the money in the owner's hands and the risk on the athlete's body. It wasn't always phrased this way. Back in the early days, before collective bargaining, deals were handwritten, often negotiated by word of mouth. You shook a man's hand, played the season, and hoped he paid what he promised. But as the league grew and the stakes exploded, the language hardened. By the 1970s, when player unions began to push back, the contract became both weapon and shield. Owners used lawyers to protect their control. Players hired agents to translate survival. It became a war of interpretation. A rookie entering the league today sees a signing bonus and believes it's real money. But every dollar comes with strings that can unravel overnight. There are per-game active bonuses, workout clauses, incentive thresholds, all structured to ensure that if you miss a game, the ledger shifts. Some contracts even void future guarantees if you suffer a non-football injury, which can include something as simple as slipping on ice. In the eyes of the paper, loyalty doesn't exist, only liability. Take the story of linebacker Zach Orr, who was set to sign an extension after a breakout season in Baltimore. Then doctors discovered a congenital neck condition. Within days, the contract offer evaporated. No injury settlement, no payout. The team moved on because the clause said they could. The crowd remembers his tackles. The franchise remembers the risk they didn't have to take. Orr retired at 24. A casualty not of a hit, but of a sentence buried 3 pages deep. Agents will tell you that's the job, to anticipate betrayal before it happens. Some are honest about it, most aren't. The best agents in football aren't the ones who talk tough. They're the ones who understand subparagraphs. They know how to fight over the definition of guaranteed, whether it means fully protected, partially insured, or only payable if you're still on the roster by a certain date. In most NFL deals, guaranteed money isn't guaranteed at all. It's a placeholder for leverage that can vanish when a team needs cap space. Players rarely read every page. And even if they did, the jargon is so intentionally layered that it feels impenetrable. It's not written for comprehension. It's written for control. One clause might say that bonuses shall not be cumulative, a phrase that looks harmless until you realize it means you won. Collect your money if you meet overlapping performance thresholds. Another clause might define injury guarantee as something that only applies if you re-injured while still on the roster, which allows teams to cut you the day before the guarantee kicks in. And then there's the morality clause, a relic from the past that gives franchises the right to terminate contracts for behavior they deem detrimental. It's an open-ended sword. It's been used for everything from arrests to tweets to political statements. When Colin Kaepernick knelt during the anthem, his unemployment wasn't written in the headlines. It was written in silence. No owner had to say the words. The paper had already given them the cover. The deeper you study the fine print, the more you see the contradiction. A sport built on physical courage, controlled by legal caution. The player risks his neck. The team risks nothing but numbers. The contract is a reflection of the league's soul. Its obsession with control, disguised as fairness. Even the term salary cap sounds balanced until you realize it caps ambition more than it caps spending. It keeps players divided, making them believe their teammates' pay is the enemy of their own. When I talk to retired players now, there's a bitterness that goes beyond pain. Many say their worst injuries came not from the field, but from the front office. One former lineman told me he didn't even realize his final season. Incentives were unreachable. The clause required him to play 95% of snaps, a number impossible for his position given rotation schemes. Another said his team structured his bonuses around playoff participation, then cut him after the regular season ended. Both thought they were set. Both learned that the paper always wins. That's the cruel paradox of professional football. The better you play, the more valuable your contract becomes, not to you, but as leverage against you. Teams restructure deals not to reward performance, but to free cap room. Players accept those restructures out of fear. Fear of being released, replaced, or labeled ungrateful. The paper doesn't just measure worth. It manufactures obedience. The language of the contract is sterile, but its consequences are visceral. It dictates who can afford a house, who can pay medical bills, who can retire in peace. When a player tears an ACL, he doesn't just lose time, he loses earning power defined in decimals and deadlines. The contract reduces a lifetime of training to a number that expires faster than a headline. And yet, every offseason, the same ritual repeats. A player walks onto a podium, smiles for cameras, and signs his dream deal. The crowd cheers. The ticker scrolls. 5 years, $100 million. What did destinies say is how much is fake, how much depends on surviving the next hit, the next restructure, the next negotiation. The truth hides in the fine print, like a ghost that follows every signature. The league markets dreams. It sells the illusion that merit equals reward. But behind the spectacle lies an industry of contracts designed to protect owners from risk while keeping players perpetually vulnerable. It's not criminal. It's calculated. The game is physical, but the power is legal. Sometimes I think about all the names that never made it past those clauses. Men who worked their whole lives for a chance, only to be undone by a line in a document they didn't write. They aren't remembered because the paper erased them before the fans could. Their legacies aren't lost on the field. They're lost in the filing cabinets of the league office. And that's where the true hierarchy lives, not in touchdowns or stats, but in signatures and silence. The player's body may belong to the game, but his future belongs to the contract. The more you read those contracts, the more you realize, in the NFL, justice isn't blind. It's printed in small font. The paper game isn't about performance, it's about permission. Every athlete learns that lesson eventually, some too late, some just in time. But all of them, at some point, discover that the pen can hit harder than any linebacker ever could. When you peel back the history of the NFL, you find that betrayal isn't new, it's foundational. The league wasn't born from fairness or freedom. It was built on ownership, in the purest, most literal sense. In the 1920s and 1930s, player didn't sign a contract to secure his career, he signed it to surrender it. The first generation of professional football players didn't negotiate, they submitted. They weren't employees so much as property, disposable and replaceable. The paper trail from that era reads less like business documents and more like terms of servitude, written by men who saw the sport as an investment portfolio rather than a human endeavor. In those early decades, contracts were barely even contracts, often a single-page handshake, scribbled in hotel lobbies or locker rooms. There were no unions, no agents, no collective bargaining agreements. A man was lucky just to get paid what he'd been promised. Teams could void deals for any reason, and they often did. If an owner decided a player wasn't worth the travel expense, the signature meant nothing. The players had no recourse, no arbitration, no appeal. If you complained, you were blacklisted. The only thing more fragile than your health was your reputation, and a single phone call from a team executive could erase both. In the 1930s, when the league was still struggling for legitimacy, salaries averaged less than $100 per game. There were no medical benefits, no injury guarantees, no off-season stipends. A man could break his leg in December and be forgotten by January. The next fall, if he could walk, he'd beg for another shot, often at half his previous pay. The unwritten rule was simple: the player was always expendable. And behind that understanding lay the first unspoken betrayal, the realization that talent, courage, and pain were not enough to earn security. By the 1940s, as the league gained structure, so did its systems of control. The infamous reserve clause was introduced, a mechanism that allowed teams to retain the rights to a player indefinitely, even after his contract expired. It meant that once you signed with a club, you belonged to them until they decided otherwise. There was no free agency, no open market, no escape. You either accepted the terms offered or sat out, unpaid, in silence. One of the earliest examples of this quiet warfare came from players like Bill Dudley, a star halfback in the 1940s, nicknamed Bullet Bill. Dudley was among the few brave enough to challenge the establishment, refusing to sign a contract extension that undervalued his worth. The team's response was swift: threats, public criticism, and a cold dismissal that left him without options. When fans read about contract holdouts in the paper, they saw greed. What they didn't see was coercion, men punished for knowing their value. The reserve clause turned the NFL into a league of indentured athletes. Even as the sport grew, the contracts didn't evolve. They just got longer, more detailed, and more one-sided. By the 1950s, players began to whisper about the idea of unionizing. The response from ownership was immediate and ruthless. The first NFL Players Association was formed in 1956 under Cleveland Browns guard Creighton Miller, and the league treated it like treason. Team executives warned players that joining the union would mean being cut, blacklisted, or permanently labeled as difficult. The owners knew that collective strength was the only thing that could threaten their power, and they were right. But the players' unity was fragile. With small salaries and short careers, most couldn't afford to fight. You can't go on strike when your mortgage depends on next week's game check. That was the genius of the system. It kept players too desperate to resist. When you study those early documents, you can see the DNA of today's fine print. Clauses about loyalty, morality, and conduct detrimental were already in place. So were the incentives that pitted teammates against each other. Bonuses for leading the league in rushing, touchdowns, interceptions. Owners understood that competition within the locker room would prevent collaboration outside it. Divide and rule. It worked then, and it still works now. In 1958, when the Baltimore Colts faced the New York Giants in what was dubbed the greatest game ever played, America fell in love with professional football. Television transformed the sport overnight, turning part-time laborers into celebrities. But the money didn't follow the fame, at least not for the players. The league's image grew, but the salaries remained controlled, the contracts rigid. A new kind of hypocrisy took root. Players became the faces of a billion-dollar industry while earning less than corporate middle managers. Then came the 1960s, the decade of rebellion in every sense, and football was no exception. The formation of the American Football League (AFL) finally gave players a weapon: competition. For the first time, they could pit one league's offer against another. Salaries doubled, then tripled in some cases, as owners fought for talent. For a brief shining moment, the players had leverage, but leverage breeds retaliation. When the NFL and AFL merged in 1970, the power shifted back to the boardrooms. The leagues unified their contracts, their policies, and their control mechanisms. The reserve clause remained intact. Free agency was crushed, and the illusion of progress was neatly wrapped in celebration. The betrayal came not as a headline, but as a clause. The merger was marketed as a victory for football, but for the players, it was a quiet surrender. One player from that era, linebacker Dave McGezzy, captured the sentiment perfectly in his 1970 memoir, Out of Their League. He wrote, "The game was about obedience. You were paid not to think, not to speak, not to question." His words were dangerous, a public confession that shattered the myth of brotherhood between player and owner. The league treated him like a heretic, and he never played another down. What McGezzy described wasn't just football culture. It was contractual culture. The unspoken rule that you play hurt, you play scared, and you never challenge the men who own the paper. Those who did were quietly erased. Even future Hall of Famers weren't immune. Johnny Unitas, the golden arm of the 1960s, once clashed with his front office over bonus structures and was reminded that he was lucky to play at all. That was the language of control, gratitude as manipulation. Every modern contract, every clause that lets a team void guarantees, every moral provision that silences dissent, all of it traces back to this era. It was the blueprint of submission. When fans talk about the golden age of football, they imagine simpler times. But simplicity came at a price. The players' silence. The First Betrayal wasn't a scandal, it was normalization. It taught generations of athletes to accept exploitation as tradition, to believe that the system was natural, even noble. When the merger cemented the league's dominance, the owner's philosophy became gospel. Football was business, and business had no conscience. It would take lawsuits, strikes, and decades of collective defiance to even begin cracking that foundation. But back then, in the smoky offices of the 1950s and 60s, Bugay's soul was already written in ink, signed away by men who just wanted to play. Every signature carried the weight of history. Every handshake disguised a chain. Because in the early NFL, betrayal wasn't an exception. It was policy. The modern player signs his name with a different kind of fear. Not the fear of injury or failure, but of being trapped by the very document that promises him freedom. On the surface, the NFL looks like a meritocracy perform, and you get paid. But beneath the surface lies one of the most quietly oppressive mechanisms in professional sports. The franchise tag, was sold as balance, a way for teams to retain their stars while giving players guaranteed top-tier pay for a single season. But in reality, it became a cage dressed as opportunity. It's a clause that freezes time, locking players in place while the world around them, salaries, leverage, and long-term security, moves on without them. The irony is brutal. The tag was meant to protect teams from chaos, but it ended up protecting ownership from accountability. To understand the cruelty of the franchise tag, you have to understand the psychology of control. For most athletes, the prime of a career is short, 5, maybe 6 years if they're lucky. Every season matters. Every contract year is a countdown to security. But when that tag is applied, it resets the clock. 1 year guaranteed, then another, and sometimes another after that. It's a cycle that keeps players from testing free agency while keeping their value capped by the algorithm of past salaries, not the open market. The origin of the franchise tag traces back to 1993. A product of the first major collective bargaining agreement that granted players true free agency. On paper, it was progress, the right for players to choose where to play. But owners didn't surrender without a weapon in reserve. They demanded the franchise tag as a compromise, a leash attached to the promise of freedom. It allowed each team to lock down one player per year, preventing them from leaving. It was presented as rare, exceptional, a tool to prevent chaos, but like every instrument of control, it became habit. The tag is calculated from the average of the top 5 salaries at a player's position. It sounds fair until you realize what it steals. Players like Kirk Cousins, Le'Veon Bell, and Dak Prescott know that math better than anyone. Cousins was tagged twice by Washington, each time watching his long-term future slip through his fingers. In 2015, he made $19 million. In 2016, $24 million. On paper, a fortune. But those were one-year deals, no security, no health guarantees, no commitment. The team kept control, waiting to see if he'd break. Bell's story turned darker. Tagged by the Pittsburgh Steelers in back-to-back seasons, the star running back faced the cruelest paradox in sports. To play was to risk everything. To sit was to lose everything. Running backs live on borrowed time. Their bodies deteriorate faster than any other position, and without long-term guarantees, the tag is a death sentence in slow motion. In 2018, Bell refused to sign. He sat out the season, sacrificing over $14 million rather than accept another year of servitude. Fans called him selfish. Commentators called him foolish. But behind the noise, players understood. Bell wasn't fighting for money. He was fighting for principle, the right to choose his path. He became a symbol of quiet rebellion in a league that punishes independence. The franchise tag doesn't just limit choice. It manipulates perception. Teams use it to control narratives. They call it loyalty, protection, continuity. But loyalty isn't one-sided. It can't exist without reciprocity. When a player is tagged, he's told to smile for cameras and call it an honor. The unspoken reality is humiliation. A superstar forced to audition for the team that already knows his worth. Look at the case of Dak Prescott. In 2020, the Dallas Cowboys tagged him after years of negotiation. The tag paid him $31.4 million, the going rate for elite quarterbacks. But one wrong tackle, one torn ligament, and that payday would have meant nothing. And that's exactly what happened. That October, Prescott's ankles snapped on national television. He lay on the field, tears streaming down his face, knowing the system had done what it was designed to do: gamble his future against time. The team later rewarded him with a 4-year deal, but the damage was already philosophical. The tag had forced a player to prove his worth in a game where proving your worth can cost you everything. The system's defenders point to the numbers. They argue that the tag guarantees top-tier money. They say it prevents chaos in team building, that it ensures fan stability. But beneath those rationalizations lies the oldest justification for exploitation: control disguised as order. The league loves order. It loves predictability. It loves the ability to decide who stays and who goes, not through performance, but through paperwork. The franchise tag is more than a clause. It's a psychological device. It dangles reward while enforcing restraint. It gives players just enough to stay quiet, just enough to appear grateful. And it allows teams to maintain the illusion of generosity while quietly stripping away the one thing players should truly own: their freedom. The power imbalance is staggering. A tagged player can't negotiate with other teams. He can't demand extensions beyond what the team offers. He plays under threat, injury, devaluation, or replacement. One misstep, one bad year, and his franchise label evaporates overnight. Even those who profit from it know its cruelty. In 2011, during the lockout, several veterans privately admitted that the franchise tag was the necessary evil to secure broader rights. They had accepted it as a bargaining chip, never imagining it would evolve into a weapon. Today, it is. And the emotional toll is just as real as the financial one. Players speak of the anxiety, the sleepless nights before training camp, the resentment that festers in locker rooms. You can hear it in their interviews, between the rehearsed smiles and sound bites. It's business, they say, the universal code for powerlessness. There's an unspoken irony in all this. The league sells unity, teamwork, brotherhood. But the contract structures enforce isolation. Every man negotiates alone. Every tag reinforces that football is not a family. It's a transaction. When the cameras roll on Sunday, fans see loyalty, a quarterback embracing his lineman, a receiver pointing skyward after a touchdown. But loyalty can't be measured in celebrations. It's measured in how the league treats its players when the cameras are off. And when it comes to the franchise tag, loyalty ends where the ink begins. For owners, the tag is leverage. For players, it's a sentence, a single year of high pay, shadowed by the knowledge that one wrong move could end everything. Some play through it and earn extensions. Others fade quietly, replaced by rookies, their names forgotten before their contracts expire. The cruel brilliance of the tag lies in its optics. It's marketed as protection, fairness, partnership. In truth, it's a restraint designed to make compliance look like privilege. It tells every player, you belong to us until we say otherwise. The franchise tag became the modern reserve clause, hidden under the language of balance. A mechanism that perpetuates ownership, not employment. And just like the reserve clause of the past, it survives because it's embedded in the culture, normalized, justified, and unchallenged. The league calls it business, but business doesn't have to look like captivity. The franchise tag ensures it still does. In the NFL, everything can vanish in a blink. Not just a career, but the illusion that it was ever secure. The league's greatest paradox is that while it markets its stars as heroes, the system treats them as disposable assets. It's the business of collisions, physical, financial, and moral. Every contract looks like a promise. Every headline about a 5-year, $80 million deal sounds like a triumph. But buried deep inside the legal labyrinth behind the commas and subclauses is the truth. Most of that money doesn't exist. It's theoretical, conditional, and fragile, like the cartilage that holds a player's knee together. When a player's body breaks, so does the fantasy. One of the most haunting examples came in 2016, when linebacker DeAndre Levy, once the heart of the Detroit Lions defense, suffered a devastating knee injury. The Lions front office expressed concern publicly, promised support privately, then released him months later. Levy later described the experience as being discarded like trash. He'd signed a $37 million contract extension just the year before. But because the deal wasn't fully guaranteed, the team owed him only a fraction. Years of sacrifice evaporated in a single transaction. The rest of his earnings were nothing more than a mirage, paper money tied to games he'd never play. This isn't a glitch in the system. It's the system itself. The NFL, unlike the NBA or MLB, built its empire on non-guaranteed contracts. Owners and general managers justify this as flexibility, claiming that a violent sport demands adaptability. But for players, that flexibility means precarity, the constant fear that an injury, even one sustained in service of the team, could end not only their season, but their livelihood. The average NFL career lasts just over 3 years. For every superstar with endorsement deals, there are hundreds of players who leave the game broken, uninsured, and forgotten before their 30th birthday. Running back Thomas Rawls once said, "You're one hit away from being unemployed." It's not hyperbole. The moment a player is injured, his value drops, not gradually, but instantly. Teams use medical evaluations as tools of negotiation, citing durability concerns to justify cutting ties or reducing offers. Take the story of linebacker Michael Kendricks. After years of strong play in Philadelphia, he was released with 2 years left on his deal. The official reason? Cap management. The real reason? His contract was structured to balloon in the coming season's non-guaranteed money the team had no intention of honoring. Kendricks called it business, but you could hear the bitterness between the words. He knew that in football, loyalty is a one-way street. The cruelty is systemic, but it's also personal. Consider the countless players who limp away from the game with torn ligaments, concussions, and nerve damage, and find their medical coverage gone within months. The NFL Players Association fights for post-career benefits, but even with modern CBAs, the process is mired in bureaucracy. Players must prove their injuries were football-related. Many can't. The very league that documents every tackle, every hit, every snap suddenly demands impossible evidence when the bill comes due. Former offensive lineman Joe Thomas, one of the most durable players in NFL history, once said he couldn't lift his arms above his head without pain, and he was one of the lucky ones. His contract was front-loaded, his legacy intact. But for every Joe Thomas, there are hundreds like J.J. Wilcox, a safety who tore his ACL in training camp and never played again. His $3 million deal, reduced to a sliver once the guarantees expired. He was paid for the days he practiced, not for the years he gave. Behind every number in the salary database is a story like this, invisible to the fans, ignored by the headlines. The league structure incentivizes this churn. Teams exploit the rookie wage scale, draft replacements cheaply, and treat veterans as sunk costs. They sign players with flashy figures to appease the media, knowing full well that only the signing bonus, the guaranteed portion, is real. It's a game of optics. Press conferences for the promise, silence for the betrayal. And when that betrayal comes, it's swift. After the 2012 season, cornerback Dunta Robinson was cut by the Kansas City Chiefs just a year into his 3-year deal. "I gave them everything," he said, "and they gave me a phone call." The release saved the team $5 million. For a franchise, that's strategic. For a player, that's survival lost. The emotional cost is harder to measure. Many players spiral after release. Depression, identity loss, and financial collapse follow in waves. In interviews, retired players describe the transition not as retirement, but as exile. "You wake up one day, and you're not a player anymore," said former linebacker A.J. Hawk. And the world moves on. The contracts that once defined their worth become legal relics. The fine print becomes their undoing. To understand how deep this goes, you have to see how the legal machinery is built. NFL contracts are written by teams, for teams. Every clause is designed to minimize risk for ownership. Injury waivers, offset language, and per-game roster bonuses all tilt the balance. If a player gets hurt, the team can void the deal. If a team underperforms, the player bears the consequence. It's an ecosystem where the corporation always wins. Even guarantees aren't always guaranteed. In 2015, defensive tackle Mike Daniels signed a 4-year, $42 million extension with Green Bay. He earned every bit of it until he suffered a foot injury. The following offseason, the Packers released him to avoid paying the final guaranteed portion. Citing a failed physical, Daniels later revealed he'd been told by team doctors to rest and recover. He did. The team used that rest against him. That's the dark genius of the NFL contract. It's written in such a way that what's promised can be redefined at will. Health becomes liability. Loyalty becomes leverage. The public rarely sees this. Fans scroll through headlines about record-breaking deals, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, and assume every zero counts, but they don't. The truth is that only a small fraction of NFL players ever see the full value of their contracts. The average guaranteed percentage across the league hovers around 30 to 40%. For most, it's even less. So when a player tears his ACL, breaks his leg, or suffers a concussion, the real damage isn't just to his body, it's to his financial future. That's why players push so hard for guaranteed money up front. Why signing bonuses are their lifeline. But even those come with strings attached. Teams can demand repayment if they argue a player violated a clause, missed a team activity, or was injured outside the scope of employment. Imagine working in a profession where a single misstep or misfortune could erase your livelihood overnight. That's the NFL reality, dressed up as entertainment. It's why, when you talk privately with veterans, they don't speak about wins or touchdowns, they speak about survival. "Every play is a business decision," said cornerback Richard Sherman. "Every tackle is a calculation. Is this worth the risk?" It's an impossible question, and the answer changes every down. For decades, the league has hidden behind the rhetoric of opportunity, the dream that anyone from anywhere can make it. And that's true. But what it doesn't say is how quickly that dream ends, or how little of it is guaranteed. The NFL's non-guaranteed culture turns players into commodities, traded, cut or forgotten at will. The physical pain fades slowly. The financial scars never do. In the locker rooms, veterans whisper warnings to rookies. Don't trust the headline numbers. Don't buy the mansion. Don't think it'll last. Because in the NFL, the only sure thing is uncertainty. And when the lights go out, when the crowd moves on, when the contract becomes a memory, that's when the real nightmare begins. The draft is a theater of dreams, bright lights, sharp suits, trembling voices. A young man hears his name called, hugs his mother, walks across the stage, and shakes the commissioner's hand. Cameras capture the tears, the promise, the glory of what's to come. But beneath that ceremony, beneath the roaring crowd and the flashbulbs, hides the league's most calculated illusion. The rookie deal. To the public, it's a fair beginning, a way for young players to earn their place. To teams, it's the crown jewel of control. Cheap labor with no leverage. It's the quiet backbone of the NFL's business model, where talent is bought wholesale and freedom is deferred by design. When the NFL implemented the rookie wage scale in 2011, it was sold as reform. For years before, rookie contracts had ballooned to absurd levels. Sam Bradford, drafted first overall in 2010, signed a 6-year, $78 million deal before ever taking a snap. More than proven veterans who had already been to Pro Bowls. Owners argued it was unsustainable. So under the new collective bargaining agreement, CBA, rookie contracts were capped for years long. Fixed by draft position with limited negotiation room. It sounded reasonable. It even sounded fair. But fairness is an illusion when one side writes the rules. The new system shifted money from rookies to veterans, in theory. In practice, teams just pocketed the savings. The cap didn't grow to accommodate both. Instead, rookies became budget-friendly investments, trapped in contracts they couldn't renegotiate until after their third season. And for most players, 3 seasons is the entire career. It's the mirage every draft class walks into. A rookie's signing bonus becomes the lifeline, the only guaranteed money they'll ever see. For a first-rounder, that could mean a few million. For a fifth-rounder, maybe a few $100,000. After taxes, agent fees, and mandatory union dues, the real figure shrinks fast. For undrafted free agents, it's barely enough to buy stability. They play for the chance, the slimmest chance to make a roster, to survive camp cuts, to last long enough to matter. The NFL loves these stories. The undrafted underdog who beat the odds. But what it rarely mentions is that those odds are engineered to stay stacked. Under rookie deals, players are locked into fixed salaries, unable to demand raises no matter how well they perform. If they outperform their draft slot, if a third-rounder becomes a Pro Bowl starter, they still earn pennies compared to veterans. The team controls their fate, and the fifth-year option for first-round picks only extends that control. It's a leash disguised as opportunity. Dak Prescott lived this contradiction better than anyone. Drafted in the 4th round by Dallas, he became the face of the franchise almost overnight. In 2016, he led the Cowboys to a 13-3 record and earned Rookie of the Year honors. By his 3rd season, Prescott was still playing under that same deal, generating millions in revenue for the league and the Cowboys while being paid a fraction of his worth. When asked about it, he said, "I bet on myself." But the truth is, he had no choice. The system forced him to gamble his body for a payday that might never come. For every Prescott who eventually cashes in, there are dozens who don't. Running back Philip Lindsay went undrafted in 2018, became a Pro Bowler, and still made league minimum. By the time he was eligible for a new deal, injuries had dimmed his shine. The league moved on. "You think you made it?" he said later. "But they already have your replacement lined up." It's the cycle the NFL counts on: youth, peak, discard. Rookie contracts are designed with churn in mind. They let teams control payroll while extracting maximum value from players during their cheapest, most productive years. The salary cap is the justification, but the truth runs deeper. It's about leverage. about maintaining the power imbalance between ownership and labor. The numbers make it plain. In 2024, over 60% of the league's active players were still on rookie deals. That means the majority of the NFL's workforce earns the minimum or close to it. While the top 10% franchise quarterbacks, elite pass rushers command headlines and cap space, the rest subsidize the spectacle. Fans see draft night as the beginning of wealth. Players know it's the start of debt, physical, emotional, and sometimes financial. Rookies are thrust into sudden adulthood with no time to learn the system. Financial advisors swarm them. Brands court them. Relatives ask for help. And yet, the money they think they have isn't really theirs. Not yet. It's spread out over years, taxed at nearly 50% and vulnerable to fines, suspensions, or early cuts. One bad hit can end it all before the second paycheck. When Washington drafted linebacker Reuben Foster, analysts praised his team-friendly deal. Team-friendly. That's the phrase that hides the cruelty. It means cost-efficient labor. It means for years of control. Foster tore his ACL in practice before his first season. His guaranteed money evaporated. "You think the contract protects you?" he said later, "but it only protects them." Even the bonuses, the only guaranteed portion, are often structured to look larger than they are. They're spread out for cap management, paid in installments, sometimes delayed. A $5 million signing bonus might mean $1 million upfront and the rest staggered across seasons, contingent on remaining on the roster. One injury, one suspension, one misstep, and it vanishes. The league has perfected the optics of fairness while institutionalizing the economics of control. Agents fight for better rookie guarantees, but the system is too entrenched. The CBA enforces a slotting mechanism so rigid that even superstar prospects have no real bargaining power. Trevor Lawrence, drafted first overall in 2021, earned a record-setting $36.8 million deal. That is a fortune, until you realize every penny of it was predetermined by a formula before he even stepped onto the stage. The illusion of negotiation, the illusion of choice, both engineered to make the spectacle feel organic. That's why veterans sometimes look at draft night, not with joy, but with pity. They know what comes next. The grind, the invisible labor, the constant risk. They know that most rookies will never see a second contract. That the majority will leave the league within 3 years, often without savings, without insurance, without direction. And yet, the cycle repeats. Each spring, hundreds of hopefuls line up for the combine, train for pro days, sign their rookie deals, and smile for cameras. The moment is pure, the dream intact. But even then, somewhere deep inside, they sense the truth that the stage isn't a gateway. It's a trapdoor. The NFL thrives on this duality, the beauty of hope, the brutality of outcome. It packages ambition as entertainment and control as meritocracy. And the rookie deal is its most efficient tool, a binding contract of faith signed in youth, cashed in pain. Some players, like Russell Wilson or Jalen Hurts, eventually break through. They play well enough, long enough, to renegotiate, to escape the cycle. But most vanish in silence, another name on a transaction wire, another file archived in a general manager's office. The league keeps moving. The next draft is always coming. The next body, the next hope, the next mirage. Because that's what the rookie contract truly is. Not a beginning, but an illusion. A shimmering image on the horizon that disappears the moment you reach for it. And by the time most players realize it, they're already in the desert, thirsty, chasing something that was never real. The autumn of 1987 felt like a fault line. The games still played, the helmets still clashed, but something in the air had changed, something raw, uneasy, defiant. For once, it wasn't just about winning on Sundays, it was about survival on Mondays. The players had walked out. To most fans, the strike of 1987 looked like greed. Millionaires demanding more. That's how it was sold by owners and sports talk shows. But beneath the noise was a deeper truth, one that had been building for decades. It wasn't about luxury, it was about dignity. About men asking for the right to control their labor in a league that had long treated them like replaceable parts. The NFL had seen strikes before in 1968, in 1974, but this one cut deeper. Because by 1987, players had grown tired of promises. The average career was just 3 years. Salaries, while rising, were still largely at the mercy of ownership. Most contracts were non-guaranteed. Injuries could erase futures in a heartbeat. The reserve system, a relic of the league's early days, gave teams near total control. Free agency was a mirage, restricted by compensation rules that made movement almost impossible. And when the players asked for something simple, the freedom to choose where they worked once their contracts expired, the owners said no, so they stopped playing. It began quietly. In late September, after week 2 of the regular season, the NFL Players Association called for a strike. Their demand was straightforward: real free agency, real leverage, real fairness. They knew it wouldn't come easy. They knew the league would fight back. But what they didn't expect was how far the owners were willing to go to break them. When the strike hit, the league didn't shut down, it doubled down. Within days, owners announced that games would continue with replacement players. They called them scabs. Across the country, coaches scrambled to fill rosters with anyone who could still move in pads. Former college players, semi-pros construction workers who hadn't played in years. Some were veterans desperate for one last shot. Some were dreamers who just wanted to say they'd been there. The NFL branded it as a celebration of the true love of the game. But to the men walking picket lines outside stadiums, it felt like betrayal broadcast in prime time. Union leaders like Gene Upshaw stood at the center of the storm. A Hall of Fame guard turned advocate, Upshaw carried the burden of uniting men who came from vastly different worlds. He knew the stakes, not just for contracts, but for the soul of the sport. "We're not asking for a handout," he said in one interview. "We're asking for a fair shake. That's all." The owners framed it differently. They painted the strike as selfish, anti-fan, un-American. They knew how to control the narrative. And with television partners hungry for content, the games went on. The stands weren't empty. In some cities, fans crossed picket lines just to watch out of curiosity, out of defiance. In others, the silence was deafening. The football itself was sloppy, surreal. Missed tackles, busted plays, nameless jerseys. But the message from the top was clear. The NFL doesn't need stars to survive. It was psychological warfare disguised as sport. For the striking players, the pressure mounted fast. Every missed game meant a missed paycheck. Some veterans with savings held strong. But the younger players, the backups, the fringe roster guys, couldn't last. The union's strike fund was limited. The league's resources were endless. In just 3 weeks, cracks began to show. The first players crossed the line. Some said it was about loyalty to their teammates who had stayed. Others just couldn't afford to wait. The media called them heroes returning to work. But in locker rooms across the league, they were seen as traitors. The Washington Redskins became the face of the replacement era. Their coach, Joe Gibbs, managed to rally a team of fill-ins to 3 straight victories. When the strike ended and regular players returned, Washington went on to win the Super Bowl. To this day, some of those replacement players still have rings, a symbol of both triumph and fracture. By mid-October, the strike collapsed. The union officially ended it after 24 days. On paper, it looked like total defeat. Players went back to work with no free agency, no new deal, no guarantees. The owners had won the battle, but in the long game of power, something had shifted forever. The scars of 1987 didn't fade quickly. Friendships were broken, careers ended. Trust between players and the league lay in ashes, but the strike also planted a seed, A realization that the system couldn't stay this way forever. That the only thing more powerful than ownership money was collective resolve. The players had glimpsed their worth, even if the world wasn't ready to see it. Over the next few years, that memory hardened into resolve. Individual players began testing the legal system. In 1989, after Reggie White, one of the most dominant defensive ends in history, became a free agent and found no offers, the union filed a lawsuit, White v. NFL. It would take years, but that case became the lever that finally cracked the foundation the owners had built for decades. When free agency finally arrived in 1993, it didn't come as a gift. It came as a consequence, a direct descendant of that failed strike in 1987. But the cost of that victory was human. Dozens of players who had joined the walkout never played again. Some were blacklisted, quietly cut or benched. Others fell into financial ruin. The NFL doesn't like to talk about them, the men who risked everything and lost. The league moved on, repackaged the story as a blip in history. But the truth remains. 1987 was a fracture that never truly healed. It forced players to confront the harshest reality of all. That loyalty means nothing when leverage is gone. The strike changed the way the league negotiated. It also changed the way players viewed each other. Unity became fragile, conditional. The bond of brotherhood was tested, and for many, broken. But out of that disillusionment grew a new kind of awareness, one rooted not in trust, but in caution. That awareness echoes today. Every modern CBA negotiation, every dispute over contracts or revenue shares, carries the ghost of 1987. It's the unspoken reminder of what happens when a workforce stands up and the system decides to crush it. Some still call it a failure. But if you listen closely, past the noise of the games, past the highlight reels, you'll hear the other version. The one told quietly in locker rooms and alumni reunions. They'll tell you that the 1987 strike wasn't a defeat. It was an awakening. Because before that year, most players still believed that the league would take care of them. After that year, they knew better. And knowing is what eventually gave them power. Freedom. That was the promise. The word whispered like a prophecy in the years after the 1987 strike. The word that carried the dreams of every player who had ever signed a deal they couldn't escape. Free agency. The right to choose your destiny. The right to finally say no. When it arrived in 1993, it was hailed as a revolution. Newspapers called it the dawn of player empowerment. Analysts said it would forever change the balance of power. The headlines were celebratory. The players smiled in press conferences. The league applauded itself for progress. But what few realized then, and what most still don't see now, is that free agency wasn't true freedom. It was a carefully controlled illusion, engineered to look like liberation while keeping the machine intact. The story of how it began reveals everything. After the 1987 strike collapsed, the players' union decertified. It wasn't a retreat, it was a strategic pivot. By dissolving the union, players could sue the NFL not as employees under collective bargaining law, but as individuals under antitrust law. That's where White v. NFL came in, led by Reggie White. Joined by dozens of players who refused to let the system stand unchallenged. Their argument was simple: the league's rules on free agency, including the Plan B system that allowed teams to retain rights to key players, were illegal restraints of trade. For years, players had finished their contracts only to find they still couldn't sign elsewhere without their old team being compensated. It was football's version of indentured servitude, hidden beneath layers of legal jargon. The court sided with them partially. In 1993, the NFL and the newly reformed NFL Players Association reached a settlement. In exchange for dropping the lawsuit, players gained unrestricted free agency after 4 accrued seasons, if they reached that point. The league, in turn, received something priceless: a salary cap tied to league revenues. That was the real deal. Freedom for a few, control for all. Because the average NFL career lasted less than 4 years, most players would never see free agency. The majority would spend their entire time in the league under the same system of restricted movement, rookie deals, team options, and tenders. For them, free agency was theoretical. For the stars, it became a high-stakes chessboard. The first wave of free agents in 1993 discovered how strange this new marketplace could be. Reggie White signed with the Green Bay Packers for $17 million over 4 years, a record deal at the time. His signing was historic, not just for the money, but for the symbolism. It showed that the best player on the market could choose his destiny. But for every Reggie White, there were dozens of mid-tier players whose offers vanished as teams learned to manipulate the new cap system. The salary cap introduced in 1994 was marketed as equality. It would prevent rich teams from stockpiling talent and poor teams from falling behind. But equality in theory became control in practice. The cap gave owners a financial ceiling to hide behind. It became the ultimate excuse. We'd love to pay you, but the cap won't allow it. Behind closed doors, front offices mastered the art of compliance. They backloaded deals, added void years, used signing bonuses as accounting tricks. They structured contracts to look generous on paper while locking players into rigid frameworks. A star player might sign a 5-year, $50 million contract, but only the first 2 years were guaranteed. The rest depended on performance, health, and roster decisions made by men in suits. Free agency had become a game of optics. Players called it the golden handcuffs. You could move technically. You could negotiate in theory. But every move came with conditions. Teams colluded quietly to set market expectations. Agents discovered that pushing too hard got their clients blacklisted. Owners learned how to weaponize loyalty, turning every negotiation into an emotional test. Do you really want to leave? They'd ask. Do you care more about the money or the team? The media played along. The narrative shifted from players fighting for fair value to players being greedy. When star linebacker Wilber Marshall signed with Washington in 1988 as one of the first free agents, he was painted as disloyal. Even though his contract with Chicago had expired, by the mid-1990s, that stigma persisted. Fans didn't see the economics, they saw betrayal. Even today, those echoes remain. Take Kirk Cousins, one of the few players to truly beat the system. After years of franchise tags in Washington, he became a free agent and signed a fully guaranteed deal with Minnesota in 2018, the first of its kind. It was revolutionary. Yet even that deal only happened because Cousins was willing to endure years of risk and short-term tags. His success was the exception that proved the rule. To get freedom in the NFL, you first have to survive captivity. The system still favors control. Restricted free agents face tender offers that allow teams to match any contract they receive elsewhere, effectively trapping them in place. Franchise tags remain a common tool to keep stars off the market. Each mechanism is designed to look fair, but collectively, they reinforce dependence. Consider Le'Veon Bell. In 2018, he refused to play under the franchise tag for the Pittsburgh Steelers, forfeiting an entire season to prove a point that players deserved long-term guarantees, especially running backs. The media called it reckless. The league called it a gamble. When Bell returned a year later with the Jets, he signed a contract worth less than the tag he had refused. His message was noble. His reward was punishment. That's the invisible string, the cost of defiance. Teams don't need to publicly punish rebellion. The market does it for them. A player who demands too much, who sits out, who disrupts the narrative of loyalty, finds fewer offers the next time around. Quiet blackballing, disguised as cap concerns. The illusion of freedom concealing the weight of control. Even the union, once the torchbearer of labor rights, now struggles to confront this dynamic. The salary cap system ties player earnings to overall revenue, which means the more the league earns, the more the players theoretically earn too. It's a partnership, but a lopsided one. The owners control the books. The players control their bodies, and in the long run, the books always win. There's a telling quote from DeMaurice Smith, former executive director of the NFLPA. "Free agency was supposed to be our victory," he said. "But every victory in this league comes with a price tag. The price is subtle but profound. It's set the constant reminder that freedom in the NFL lies in about where you can go. It's set about what you were willing to give up to get there. It's about the leverage of fear, the economics of silence. It's the story of men who learn that the system always finds a way to turn revolution into regulation. Reggie White's legacy opened the door, but behind that door was a labyrinth of fine print, salary caps, and hidden ceilings. And for every player who made it through, hundreds never even reached the threshold. The illusion of free agency isn't that players can't move. It's that movement costs them more than anyone realizes. In reputation, in earnings, in years. It's freedom, but only within boundaries. It's control, but repackaged as choice. And when you look closely enough, you realize the truth. In the NFL, freedom isn't the absence of control. It's the illusion of it, painted in team colors and broadcast in high definition. Because if the system can convince you that you're free, it never needs to chain you again. In the mythology of football, agents were once seen as saviors. The sharp-dressed negotiators who fought for players to humble or to focus to understand the labyrinth of money, law, and power behind the game. But like everything in the NFL's hidden economy, that myth fractures under closer inspection. For every life an agent changes, there's another left hollowed out, the client who trusted, signed and vanished into the same shadows the agent once swore to protect him from. It all started innocently enough. In the 1960s and 70s, as the money grew and the stakes exploded, players realized they needed advocates who spoke the language of contracts and clauses. Men who could face down billionaire owners in boardrooms where loyalty was negotiable and every handshake hit a loophole. But representation came with its own cost. The first wave of super agents, men like Lee Steinberg, Marvin Demoff, and Eugene Parker, didn't just change deals. They changed power itself. Steinberg, often called the real-life inspiration for Jerry Maguire, once said, "My job wasn't to make the richest deal. It was to make the right one." It sounded noble. And in some cases, it was. He helped create mechanisms for guaranteed money, injury protection, and post-career benefits. Yet, for every ethical agent fighting the system, there were 10 more who learned how to exploit it. By the late 1980s, as free agency loomed and television money transformed the league, agents realized they weren't just middlemen, they were gatekeepers. They controlled access to endorsements, training camps, and front office conversations. A few dozen names began to represent hundreds of players, controlling billions in career earnings. The balance of power shifted not toward the players, but toward the brokers who profited off their dreams. Some agents built empires off the desperation of rookies who didn't know any better. They offered cash advances, cars, and promises. They said, "Sign with me, and I'll make you rich." But fine print followed there, too. A small percentage, 2, 3, sometimes even 5% of every deal could vanish into agency fees. Add marketing cuts, training expenses, and personal management costs. And some players discovered they were walking away with half of what their contract numbers suggested. In 2013, a report from Sports Illustrated estimated that nearly 78% of former NFL players were either bankrupt or under financial stress within 2 years of retirement. The public blamed their spending. The truth, buried under layers of non-guaranteed deals and agent commissions, was much darker. Many had never truly owned their own earnings to begin with. Archival interview audio. Former linebacker Bart Scott once said, "The first contract I signed, I thought I was rich. Then my agent showed me the breakdown. I said, wait, who is this check for? Ah." Agents became both protectors and predators. Some, like Drew Rosenhaus, played the role of power broker to perfection. Publicly loyal, privately ruthless. He told 60 Minutes, "I work for my clients, not the teams." But in practice, loyalty often depended on leverage. The more marketable the player, the more attention they received. The moment performance dropped, the phone calls stopped. Behind closed doors, the relationships were fragile. Players often discovered their own signatures attached to agreements they barely understood. Others realized their agents had business deals with team executives, blurring the line between representation and manipulation. The NFL Players Association tried to regulate the industry, but enforcement was limited. Agents found loopholes they always did. Some operated under suspended licenses, funneling negotiations through shell firms or marketing advisors. By the 1990s, the term agent trust became an oxymoron. Players whispered stories of betrayal in locker rooms, about the man who promised a future and vanished after the signing bonus cleared. The stories grew so common that financial advisors began branding themselves as post-agent consultants, helping players rebuild from the wreckage of deals gone wrong. But the manipulation ran deeper than any single bad actor. It became systemic. Agents began collaborating with trainers, scouts, and brand reps to package players, shaping not just their contracts, but their entire public image. Some even advised athletes to take short-term deals to prove themselves again, knowing each new negotiation brought another commission. A cycle of control disguised as opportunity. The rookie out of Alabama who trusted his agent's word over his own lawyer. The veteran tight end whose endorsement deals were rerouted through shell companies. The backup quarterback who found out his agent had been negotiating his replacement-esque contract behind his back. Every layer of the industry carried its own quiet betrayals. The irony, the same system that promised to protect players from predatory owners became predatory itself. Even union officials, under pressure to reform the system, struggled to keep up. The NFLPA's registry of certified agents ballooned past 800 by the 2000s. But fewer than 5% represented 80% of the league's players. That concentration of power mirrored the ownership structure they were supposed to balance. The same few names kept appearing in press conferences, draft nights, and arbitration hearings. In the documentary Broke, one financial planner recalled watching players lose millions to men they called friends. It wasn't just greed. It was trust, blind, reckless trust. These guys believed in people who saw them as commodities. The deeper truth is this: agents didn't create the exploitation, they just learned to monetize it. They existed in the space the NFL allowed. When a system is built to favor the league, anyone who learns its language can profit from its silence. Today, the biggest agencies, CAA Athletes First, Clutch Sports, manage rosters that rival entire franchises. Their influence extends beyond contracts to media appearances, documentaries, and brand alignments. Representation became an industry of image management. A player's story could be curated, his loyalty marketed, his legacy rewritten. And behind every public redemption arc or viral signing video is an agent who calculated the optics down to the decimal. But at the human level, the cost remains unchanged. The player who limps out of the league after 5 seasons doesn't remember the fine print. He remembers the conversations, the handshakes, the promises, the trust. He remembers believing he mattered. The modern NFL is filled with men who can separate their careers from the paperwork that defined them. They enter the league dreaming of control, only to learn that control was the illusion the system sold best. Their S-Align, one retired player said during an interview that still lingers, "You think you're re-signing a contract. But what you're really signing is a timeline. And when the ink dries, your time starts running out." That line sums up the agent game perfectly. Because at its core, representation isn't about protection. It's about proximity to money, to power, to the next big deal. Every agent wants to be indispensable, but in the end, they too are replaceable. The system feeds itself, consuming everyone who steps inside it, whether they wear pads or Prada. As long as contracts remain the true language of football, agents will always be its interpreters, fluent in ambiguity, fluent in leverage. And for players, the translation often comes too late, because on paper, it's all about numbers. But in the shadows, it's about who controls the pen. There's a sound that no one prepares you for in football silence. Not the silence before the snap or the stunned quiet of a losing locker room, but the kind that settles years later when your name no longer echoes through stadiums. When the highlight reels fade and the league that once called you family forgets your number, your face, your pain. That's the silence of a veteran forgotten. The NFL sells a dream of legacy, of bronze busts and Super Bowl rings. But for most who played the game, the only legacy left is scar tissue and paperwork. The system that celebrates youth, power, and speed has little room for the slow, the injured, or the retired. Once the cameras stop rolling, players face a second career they never trained for, fighting for benefits they were promised and dignity they once thought was permanent. For decades, the league's relationship with its former players has been defined by quiet neglect. Behind the spectacle of billion-dollar TV deals lies a pension structure that seems designed to save money, not lives. The NFL Player Retirement Plan was created in 1959, back when the league was still finding its identity. It offered a modest benefit, around $200 per month, for those who played 5 years or more. But as the league's wealth exploded, the system never truly evolved to match it. Consider this: a man who played in the 1970s or 1980s, who endured concussions before they had a name, who practiced in 110-degree heat before hydration rules existed. Many of those men now receive less in monthly pension than the league spends on a single halftime pyrotechnics display. They built the modern game with their bodies and were left with stipends that barely cover a week of medical bills. Harry Carson, the Hall of Fame linebacker for the New York Giants, once said, "We were gladiators." But gladiators didn't get benefits after the arena closed. Carson's generation, the one that fought through the pre-CBA chaos, still bears the financial scars of a system that rewarded silence. For every player who managed to transition into broadcasting or coaching, hundreds more faded quietly into small towns, working night shifts or living off savings that disappeared faster than their memories. Then came the concussion crisis. The class action lawsuit filed in 2011 by more than 4,500 former players wasn't just about medical compensation. It was about acknowledgement, an admission that the league knew more than it said. The settlement that followed was worth hundreds of millions on paper, but the reality was more complicated. Many players found themselves trapped in bureaucratic limbo, their claims delayed, denied, or disqualified by paperwork. Mike Webster's story became the symbol of it all. The legendary Steelers center, a man who defined toughness for a generation, spent his post-football life living in his car, suffering from severe brain damage. When he died in 2002, his autopsy revealed the first documented case of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, in an NFL player. His brain became evidence in a war the league tried not to fight. The benefit system didn't know how to process men like Webster. His disability claims were initially denied. It took years of litigation, headlines, and public pressure before he was recognized, not as a hero, but as a victim of the game he made famous. And his case wasn't isolated. The NFL's disability plan, originally designed to support players with long-term health issues, became a labyrinth of technicalities. Former players described the process like a courtroom battle where the burden of proof rests entirely on the injured. Paperwork could take years. Medical reviews could be overturned by administrators with no medical background. Ken Rutgers, a former offensive lineman for the Green Bay Packers, once said in frustration, "You'd think we were asking for favors, not fighting for what we earned." It's a paradox that haunts the league. The bigger it grows, the smaller its compassion seems to become. The modern NFL has the resources to ensure no veteran ever suffers in silence, but the system still functions on austerity. Every approval feels like a negotiation. Every benefit check feels like charity. The truth is, the NFL doesn't run on sentiment, it runs on structure. The pension system, the disability plan, the legacy fund, they exist not as acts of kindness, but as contractual obligations, written with the same precision as player deals. And like all contracts in football, the language favors the league. When Congress confronted the NFL over its handling of retired players in 2007, Commissioner Roger Goodell testified that the league's benefits were the most generous in professional sports. Statistically, that might have been true, but generosity isn't measured in numbers, it's measured in humanity. The same week Goodell gave that testimony, several former players testified that they were living on less than $2,000 a month. Some were homeless, others couldn't afford medication. It is an old pattern in American sports, the illusion of gratitude masking a structure of control. The league honors its legends on Sunday afternoons, showing grainy highlights and slow-motion footage while orchestral music swells. But Monday morning, those same men might be fighting over medical forms. What hurts most for many veterans isn't the money, it's the feeling of erasure. One retired player, a former cornerback who spent 7 years in the league, once told the Washington Post, "When you're in, the phone never stops ringing. When you're out, it never rings again." That loneliness, that abrupt end to purpose, is what no contract can prepare you for. The transition programs, career seminars, and mental health initiatives that exist today came too late for thousands who drifted into obscurity. The average NFL career lasts just 3.3 years. Yet the psychological effects of leaving the game can last decades. Depression, substance abuse, and identity collapse haunt many who once seemed indestructible. Players like Larry Morris, a linebacker from the 1960s, who once carried the Chicago Bears defense, later found himself lost to dementia. Or Dave Durson, who took his own life in 2011 and left a note asking that his brain be studied, another chapter in the CTE tragedy. These weren't fringe players. They were icons reduced to medical statistics. In 2019, the league created the Inspire Change and Player Care Foundation programs to address the mounting criticism. They help some, no doubt. But the structure still mirrors the same hierarchy, access, paperwork, and eligibility. The men who need the help most often lack the resources or health to navigate the process. It's the cruel symmetry of football. When you're young, the system protects the brand. When you're old, the system protects itself. What the veterans built, the rivalries, the history, the foundation of the modern game, is now monetized in documentaries, streaming packages, and nostalgic broadcasts. But the men themselves rarely profit. Their likeness, their stories, their footage, owned by the league. Even their names appear in video games that sell millions, while their medical bills pile up. One could argue that the NFL doesn't forget its veterans. It remembers them only as intellectual property. And yet, within this bleak picture, there are flickers of redemption. Groups like the Gridiron Greats Assistance Fund, co-founded by Mike Ditka, have stepped in where the league has not. They provide medical and financial help for aging players left behind. "We don't care about paperwork," Ditka said once. If they need help, they get it. It shouldn't have taken an outside charity to restore dignity to the men who built professional football. But perhaps that's the truest reflection of the NFL's shadow. The gap between what it owes and what it chooses to pay. The silence that follows a career isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's the sound of being erased. And for the veterans who live in that silence, forgotten by contracts, ignored by systems, the real question becomes, how much was that roar of the crowd worth when it cost everything that came after? The league calls it risk. Players call it the price. But behind the word lies a truth too often buried under layers of legalese and corporate polish that in the NFL, health has always been a commodity traded, negotiated, and dismissed like any other asset on a balance sheet. When a player signs his contract, the ink carries a silent clause far heavier than any written term. You are your body. And once that body fails, your worth expires. The franchise may praise your toughness, your leadership, your will to play through pain, but the same system that celebrates sacrifice is built to deny accountability for its cost. In the NFL's economic design, health isn't guaranteed. Performance is lit. And performance, unlike the human body, can be quantified, measured in yards, tackles, and touchdowns. The contract reflects that philosophy. Bonuses are tied to playtime, incentives to stats, extensions to durability. The structure rewards those who stay upright, not those who survive the damage. Every Sunday, men walk onto fields with injuries that would sideline most people for months. Torn ligaments, separated shoulders, fractured ribs. They tape it up, take an injection, and play, not because they're fearless, but because the alternative is financial extinction. Sitting out to long risks, losing a starting spot, a roster bonus, or a team's faith. In the NFL, hesitation is indistinguishable from weakness, and weakness is the fastest way out. The system knows this. It's built on it. A 2017 Players Association survey revealed that 89% of active players admitted to hiding or underreporting injuries. Not because they wanted to be heroes, because they didn't trust the business to protect them if they told the truth. The phrase "next man up" has become the league's unofficial policy on health. It sounds like grit, but it's really a doctrine of replaceability. Every team has a medical staff, but those doctors are paid by the franchise, not the players. Their duty of loyalty, ethically, should rest with the athlete. In practice, it often aligns with management. There are countless cases where players were cleared to play despite symptoms that screamed otherwise. The line between medical advice and corporate interest has always been blurred, sometimes fatally so. No story captures that tension more vividly than that of offensive lineman Eugene Monroe. Drafted by the Jaguars in 2009, Monroe was bright, articulate, and outspoken about player safety. By his mid-20s, he'd already suffered multiple concussions. He began speaking publicly about the league's hypocrisy, its billion-dollar marketing around player health, while fighting against research into medical marijuana, a treatment players believed could reduce opioid dependence. In 2016, Monroe became the first active player to call for cannabis reform in the NFL. Weeks later, he was released. The team cited performance and injury concerns. Monroe called it a message. No other team picked him up, despite his proven talent. He retired the same year another man exiled for challenging the system's moral economy. Contracts, in theory, should provide protection. In practice, they shield the league. The injury clause, a standard feature in nearly every deal, specifies that if a player is hurt, the team can terminate or restructure his contract, often without full payout. Non-guaranteed money vanishes. Signing bonuses may be prorated and recouped. Even injury settlements, when offered, are one-time payments that rarely cover long-term rehabilitation. The language is precise, sterile. Team may terminate employment if player fails to perform services due to physical condition. But behind those words are broken men trying to walk without pain. One of the most telling examples came in 2013, when safety Rashard Johnson of the Arizona Cardinals lost part of his finger during a game. He finished the match, unaware of the extent of the injury, until later. The team praised his toughness. But weeks afterward, he learned that his contract would not guarantee coverage for potential complications beyond the season. The finger became a symbol, not of bravery, but of disposability. The NFL's approach to health is deeply intertwined with its financial structure. The collective bargaining agreement (CBA) governs everything from salary caps to rehabilitation protocols. On paper, it looks fair. Every player under contract is entitled to medical care for injuries sustained during play. But the duration of that care is limited. Once a player retires, the league's obligations often end within months. After that, medical costs shift to the player, unless they qualify for one of the notoriously difficult disability benefits. This is where the system reveals its cruel genius. The very injuries that make it impossible to work also make it harder to prove total disability under the League's definitions. Players find themselves trapped, too injured to play, but not disabled enough to qualify for long-term coverage. Former linebacker Darrell Ingram once said in frustration, "They told me I could appeal my denial, but I couldn't even hold a pen to fill out the forms." That's not hyperbole. It's the lived experience of hundreds of men who gave their physical futures to the game. The NFL's injury protocols have improved on paper, but the core logic hasn't changed. Teams now have concussion spotters, blue tents, and medical advisors. Yet players still face the same calculation: short-term loyalty versus long-term survival. A doctor may diagnose a concussion, but a coach decides if you suit up next week. The medical system can recommend. The contract dictates. Even the injury reserve IR list, meant to protect players, doubles as a financial tool. Once placed on IR, a player's salary can be partially withheld depending on contract terms. For veterans, that often means being paid less for being broken, even when they broke themselves for the team. This tension reached a breaking point in 2017 when the NFL faced multiple lawsuits over the distribution of painkillers. Former players alleged that team doctors routinely handed out medications like Vicodin and Toradol to keep men on the field. The drugs masked pain but accelerated long-term damage. The court documents painted a chilling picture, not of negligence, but of a calculated business practice. Health was managed, not protected. Quarterback Ryan Leaf, who battled addiction after his short career, once said, "We weren't treated as patients. We were inventory." That inventory model still drives the business. The average NFL contract length hovers around 3.5 years. The league saves millions annually through non-guaranteed deals that end the moment a player becomes damaged goods. For every superstar with guaranteed money, dozens play under conditional terms that vanish the moment a medical file gets too thick. It's not that the league denies risk, it markets it. The commercials show grit, pain, and triumph. The NFL's salute to service campaigns wrap sacrifice in patriotic colors. But the truth beneath the imagery is transactional. Health is the invisible currency of football, and the market is merciless. Some try to fight back. The NFLPA has lobbied for stronger post-career medical coverage, for lifetime health care, for transparency in team medical decisions. The league counters with actuarial math and cap space arguments. The debate becomes an abstraction, a numbers game detached from human consequence. The human cost, though, remains undeniable. Players wake up years after retirement, unable to tie their shoes without wincing. Fingers twisted permanently, joints grinding bone to bone, memories fading in and out. They call it the price of the game, but it's not a price, it's a transfer. The league profits and the player pays. When the lights fade and the crowd disappears, the contract still stands, a silent witness to what was promised and what was withheld. The paper doesn't bleed, ache, or forget. It endures, pristine and unfeeling, while the men who signed it limp through the rest of their lives. And that is the truest definition of the NFL's shadow economy, a world where performance is compensated, but health is collateral. The league loves the phrase protecting the shield, but maybe the shield was never meant to protect the players at all. In the modern NFL, money doesn't flow the way most fans think it does. There's an illusion, a shimmering, perfectly balanced ecosystem of salaries, bonuses, and incentives that supposedly ensures parity. It's the story of the salary cap, that mythical number that keeps rich teams honest and poor teams hopeful. But behind the curtain, it's an accountant's chessboard, one that rewards manipulation, not merit. The NFL's salary cap is sold as a measure of fairness. Every team, in theory, starts with the same financial ceiling, a limit to prevent dynasties and protect balance. But it's not a ceiling, it's a labyrinth. General managers hire capologists whose job isn't to spend wisely, but to bend reality. The rules allow for dead money, void years, guaranteed structures, and restructured bonuses. It's not about managing players, it's about managing math. A contract might read 5 years, $100 million, but that number is fiction. Maybe $50 million of that is guaranteed, but even that's riddled with conditions. Signing bonuses are prorated, spreading across years that may never even happen. When a player is cut or traded, those deferred numbers come crashing back as dead money cap space burned on a ghost. The Saints, the Rams, the Eagles, they've all danced this dance. They kick the can down the road, borrowing from tomorrow to buy today, and it works. Until it doesn't. When the window closes, when the stars age, when the balance sheet finally catches up, they rebuild, not because of bad football, but because of bad accounting that caught up with them. Meanwhile, the players live in a parallel world. A star might restructure his deal to help the team, converting salary into bonus to open cap space. But every restructure is a risk, a bet on the future of the same organization that might cut him the next year. Teams sell loyalty in the form of flexibility. Players are praised for being team first, while owners reap the profit of their sacrifice. Then there's the floor, the minimum each team must spend. On paper, it keeps owners from pocketing too much. In practice, it's a mirage. The league measures spending over multi-year cycles, meaning a team can underpay for years and make up for it later. It's legal manipulation. The numbers look fine on balance sheets and fine print, but in the locker room, it feels like betrayal. The cap itself grows every year, a reflection of booming TV deals and gambling revenue. Yet the middle class of players keep shrinking. The stars, the quarterbacks, the headline positions take the lion's share, while veterans and role players fight over what's left. The illusion of fairness hides the fact that the cap doesn't protect equality. It protects efficiency. The analytics revolution made this worse. Teams no longer pay for leadership or loyalty. They pay for production per dollar. A 30-year-old linebacker might still play at a high level, but the spreadsheet says a rookie can do 80% of his job for 20% of his salary. That's not football. That's finance. When the league calls it the business side of the game, that's what they mean. The cap isn't a limit, it's leverage. Owners use it to justify every cut, every holdout, every unfulfilled promise. We'd love to keep you, they say, but the cap won't let us. It's the perfect scapegoat. The invisible hand that absolves human hands of responsibility, and yet the illusion endures. The league points to parity, to how teams like the Bengals or Lions can rise from irrelevance. But parity isn't fairness. It's a managed equilibrium. Every dollar, every decision, every contract is part of a formula designed to create balance without true equality. For players, the salary cap is a reminder. Your value isn't who you are, it's what you cost. You can be beloved, respected, even legendary, but if your number's too high, the ledger decides your fate. The NFL calls it the cost of doing business. The players call it the price of being human in a system built for numbers. Because under the bright lights of Sunday, it's still a game of men and moments. But behind the spreadsheets, behind the boardroom doors, the game is different. It's about deferred guarantees, voidable years, and financial illusion, the kind of fairness that only an accountant could believe in. In the language of the NFL, few words carry as much quiet dread as termination. It doesn't sound violent, but it is. It's the soft corporate version of being erased from a roster, from a paycheck, from a future, to the outside world. It's just a transaction. To a player, it's a financial guillotine. Termination pay was meant to be a safety net. The idea was simple. If you make the final 53-man roster and you recut during the season, you're entitled to the rest of your salary. It was designed as a rare act of fairness in a league built on risk. But in practice, teams learned to twist it, to weaponize the calendar, the rules, and the language of contracts to avoid paying what's earned. It starts before week 1. Players who think they've made it, who call their families, who finally exhale after training camp, can be released the next day. Teams do it deliberately, cutting veterans before the first Sunday so they won't owe them full season termination pay. Then, a week later, they might re-sign them. Same locker, same jersey, different financial reality. The message is clear. Loyalty runs one way. For veterans, the fear is constant. They know every day on the roster could be their last. A pulled hamstring, a bad game, or a younger player's emergence can trigger a pink slip and the loss of thousands, sometimes millions, in owed pay. Coaches call it business decisions, but the timing often reveals the truth. Cuts happen on Mondays and Tuesdays, right before that next week's salary becomes guaranteed. The manipulation extends into the structure of contracts themselves. Split contracts, for example, allow teams to pay injured players less if they land on injured reserve. A player who was promised $900,000 might suddenly see that number drop to $450,000 simply because his knee gave out in practice. It's legal, it's routine, and it's devastating. Then there's the quiet clause most fans never see. Offset language. A player cut by one team can sign with another, but the salary from his new team offsets the money his old team still owes him. That means owners effectively get a rebate, a loophole that punishes mobility and rewards manipulation. It's the league's version of double taxation, but it only ever hurts one side. For younger players, the threat is even simpler. Non-guaranteed futures. A rookie might sign a 3-year deal, but the team can walk away after one season without paying a cent beyond bonuses already earned. That is why most players, nearly 70%, never see the second year of their first contract. They're disposable labor under the guise of professional opportunity. Behind every transaction alert on social media, there's a human story that never trends. A lineman who just bought a home. A special teamer who moved his family across the country. A veteran who delayed surgery to prove his value. When they're cut, it's not just about pride, it's about financial survival. Teams know this, and they exploit it. They time their cuts with precision. They sign players to prove-it deals with partial guarantees, then release them right before those bonuses trigger. They stash fringe players on practice squads to avoid paying veteran minimums, knowing the psychological weight that being cut carries. It's not about winning games, it's about controlling cost. In the collective bargaining agreements, the NFLPA has tried to close these loopholes. But every new rule becomes a new opportunity for creative avoidance. When one door closes, another fine print clause opens, and players, most of whom will only last 3 years in the league, don't have the leverage to fight each case. By the time they understand how they were shorted, the game has already moved on. Some of the most tragic stories are the ones that never make headlines. Players who played through pain, trusting that being on the roster in week 1 guaranteed them a paycheck. Then a sudden release, often labeled performance-related. The money disappears, but the medical bills remain. The promise of termination pay turns out to be little more than a mirage. It's a quiet system of control. Players are reminded daily that their value isn't in how well they perform, but in how cheaply they can be replaced. The illusion of opportunity of the American dream in cleats masks the economic reality of a labor force with no safety net. And when that net does exist, it's strung with loopholes. Every cut, every contract clause, every strategic release is part of the larger machine, a system designed not just to manage rosters, but to preserve power. The owners call it fiscal responsibility. The league calls it business. But for the players, it's a reminder that the NFL's most ruthless plays always happen on the field. Because in the end, the threat isn't always loud, doesn't come with boos or broken bones. Sometimes it comes quietly, through paperwork and procedure. A signature that wipes away a man's season. A clause that nullifies months of effort. That's the quiet threat of termination pay. A promise written in ink, erased by design. In every draft, the cameras fade after the 7th round. The lights dim, the music stops, and the celebration ends. What's left are hundreds of men waiting by the phone, their families still in the living room. The cake untouched, the silence heavy. For them, the dream hasn't died yet. It's just become more fragile, more conditional. These are the undrafted, the invisible. The men who make the league possible, but never make the poster. Every year, roughly 1,700 players fill NFL rosters. Nearly a third of them, over 500, entered the league without being drafted. They come from small schools, from overlooked programs, from lives where the league's spotlight never reached. They train the same, hit the same, bleed the same. But from the moment they sign, the system tells them, you are not like the rest. Their contracts are the lightest in the building, the minimum deals, often just a few thousand in signing bonuses, sometimes nothing at all. Their names are written in pencil, not ink. They can be cut at any moment, with no guaranteed money, no protections, no leverage. They are roster filler, living, breathing placeholders in a billion-dollar equation. For every Tom Brady story, there are hundreds of forgotten names. Players like David Quessenberry, who fought through cancer after being drafted late and still clawed his way back into the league. Or Isaiah Wright, whose brief shot in Washington ended as quietly as it began. These men live at the intersection of hope and risk, where one bad rep, one missed block, can erase a lifetime of work. Training camp is their audition stage. They sleep in dorms, study playbooks through the night, and wake up knowing each mistake could be their last. Coaches tell them, you're competing for a job, but they don't mention that the job may only last a week. Every rep is a resume, every practice a trial. And even when they impress, they often don't survive the numbers game. Because when cut-down day comes, it's not about fairness, it's about finance. Teams trim rosters to meet salary caps, choosing cheaper options, fresher bodies, more flexible contracts. The undrafted player is expendable by design. His pay can be delayed, reduced, or replaced entirely without affecting the bottom line. Some players get signed to practice squads, a kind of limbo between the league and unemployment. The pay is modest, around $12,000 a week, but it comes without security. They can be cut at any moment, without reason, without recourse. One day you're running scout team against the first defense. The next, your key card stops working. No call, no goodbye. And yet, it's these men who make the league's daily engine run. They're the tackling dummies in drills, the unsung backups who absorb the hits, the ghost opponents who prepare stars for Sunday. They're the quiet shadows behind every touchdown, but the cameras never pan to them, and the contracts never protect them. Some never even see a real game check. They bounce from team to team, sometimes 4 or 5 cities in a single season. A Tuesday flight, a Wednesday physical, a Friday release. The league calls it roster movement. To them, it's homelessness wrapped in professionalism. They live out of duffel bags and short-term leases, chasing the faint promise of permanence. And when their time ends, when the calls stop coming, they re-left with almost nothing. No pension, no benefits, no health coverage. Most undrafted players never reach the 3 credited seasons required for lifetime health insurance. Their bodies break down long before their resumes can even be called careers. Consider this. The average career of an undrafted player lasts less than 2 years. That's barely long enough to qualify for the minimum pension. Many leave with more debt than earnings, having spent their signing bonuses on relocation, training, or family support. The league has moved on, and they're left to start over at 25 with concussions, injuries, and no degree of financial safety. The NFL markets itself as the land of opportunity. If you can play, you'll play. But that's only half the truth. Opportunity in this league is not meritocratic, it's economic. Coaches will choose the player who costs less and fits better in the ledger. Talent is important, but affordability is decisive. The undrafted are trapped in a paradox. They're good enough to be here, but too replaceable to matter. And yet, the heart of the league, its hunger, its authenticity still beats inside them. They play for reasons beyond contracts or fame. For many, it's survival. For others, it's love. They are the sons of single mothers, the kids from forgotten towns, the walk-ons who refuse to quit. Their stories don't end with confetti. They end with quiet dignity, with lessons learned in hardship, with unspoken courage. In locker rooms, veterans know who the undrafted are. They nod to them, help them, warn them. Save your money, they whisper. Don't sign a lease. Don't believe the hype. The unspoken fraternity of the disposable bonded, not by glory, but by the knowledge that the league was never built for their protection. And that's what makes the system so efficient. The league needs its invisible class, the cheap labor that keeps the spectacle alive. Every great team was built not just on superstars, but on the backs of men who played for pennies and vanished quietly. Their absence is the NFL's best-kept secret, that its foundation rests on hundreds of silent sacrifices. Some nights, after practice, you'll see them sitting alone in the empty stands, staring at the field they fought so hard to touch. They know the odds. They know tomorrow might bring a call upstairs, but still, they show up. Because for them, this is more than a game. It's a final chance at belonging, even if the system never planned to remember them. They are the invisible labor of American sport. The ones who chase a dream they'll never own. The ones who make football look effortless while paying the cost in silence. In the past, silence was survival. Speaking out meant risking your spot, your contract, your livelihood. But the NFL of the 21st century is no longer insulated by the same walls that once hid its internal machinery. The rise of social media changed everything. A direct line between player and public. A channel that bypassed agents, owners, and league-approved narratives. For the first time, players had a voice they controlled. And they started using it. It began quietly, a tweet here, a statement there. But soon, it became something larger. Social media gave players a weapon the league couldn't regulate. Truth. A player could post the details of a contract dispute, show the public the human side of negotiations, reveal the manipulation behind team-friendly deals. The illusion of total control began to crack. Think of 2011, when the lockout exposed how much the players knew and how much they didn't. Social media wasn't what it is today, but it was enough for men like Drew Brees, Kelvin Beachum, and others to rally teammates publicly, using platforms to unify in ways owners never expected. They were no longer whispering in locker rooms. They were broadcasting to millions. The curtain began to lift, but the shift truly gained force in the late 2010s, the era of awareness, activism, and transparency. Colin Kaepernick knelt in protest of racial injustice, and the league's first instinct was silence. Contracts were quietly voided, opportunities withdrawn, reputations reshaped through selective leaks. It wasn't about performance anymore. It was about control. What followed was one of the most divisive and revealing chapters in modern sports history. When Kaepernick was effectively blackballed from the league, players began to see what had always been hidden in plain sight: the unspoken power clause. No matter the statistics, no matter the leadership, a player who threatened the system's comfort could be erased without formal penalty. And that erasure was contractual, not just cultural. The message was clear. The league didn't need to issue bans when it could use paperwork. Teams could quietly cite fit, philosophy, or roster direction. Behind the scenes, clauses in contracts allowed release at the team's discretion, a phrase vague enough to end any career without recourse. But the players were evolving too. By the 2020s, activism wasn't just about justice, it was about transparency. Social media became a public archive of broken promises. Players posted their injury stories, contract screenshots, even legal filings. They shared the details that used to stay hidden in front offices. Suddenly, fans were learning that their favorite players' deals weren't guaranteed, that a torn ACL could mean financial ruin. When Seahawks guard DJ Fluker revealed his contract cutdown on Twitter, fans saw how quick the business could turn. When players like Juju Smith-Schuster spoke openly about how incentives and clauses shaped their game-time decisions, the myth of total player freedom crumbled. The audience began to understand what the insiders always knew. The system rewards loyalty only until it becomes expensive. But this new transparency brought risk. Teams and the league began monitoring social media activity with increasing scrutiny. A single tweet could void a clause or lead to conduct detrimental penalties. Players started consulting lawyers before posting a quiet evolution of the modern contract, where silence was no longer just recommended, but strategically required. Yet, something irreversible had changed. The collective awareness spread beyond the locker room. The NFL Players Association, long criticized for weakness, began adapting. They started pushing for new disclosure rules, clearer contract terms, and limits on vague language. Transparency became both a demand and a defense. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic pushed these tensions into full view. Players faced an impossible choice: risk their health for non-guaranteed salaries or opt out for uncertain futures. Many learned for the first time that their contracts didn't fully protect them from global crisis. Opt-out clauses were negotiated on the fly, revealing how ill-prepared the system was to handle genuine player autonomy. That year, DeMaurice Smith, then executive director of the NFLPA, said, "The fight isn't about paychecks, it's about power." He was right. The battle lines had shifted from collective bargaining tables to the digital sphere. Public opinion became leverage, and players were learning how to use it. Social media turned football into a two-way mirror. Fans could now see inside the machinery, the cuts, the lies, the language games. It became harder for teams to hide behind team-first rhetoric when players showed receipts. A generation that grew up watching highlight reels was now watching negotiations in real time. And with that came solidarity. When the league hesitated to respond to social movements, players coordinated online, releasing their own statements. The NFL could no longer dictate the message. Men like Malcolm Jenkins, Michael Thomas, and Patrick Mahomes became voices not just of skill, but of principle. They spoke of guaranteed pay, post-career health, and the need for honesty in an industry that thrives on myth. Still, the system hasn't surrendered. Owners and executives have found new ways to maintain dominance using analytics to justify cold decisions, language to protect themselves from accountability, and algorithms to track sentiment. The business evolved just as the players did. The chessboard grew more complex. Now, even endorsements and social media partnerships are quietly tied to good conduct clauses. A mistimed tweet or political statement can cost millions. The message is subtle but familiar. You can speak, but you will pay for it. The shadow economy of control adapts with every new form of communication. But the players are adapting faster. Younger generations enter the league with media literacy, legal counsel, and financial awareness that previous eras never had. They're studying their contracts like playbooks, dissecting every clause, every incentive. Some hire independent analysts to audit deals before signing. Others form private chat groups to compare contract terms anonymously, warning each other about predatory language. The brotherhood of silence is being replaced by a network of truth. This new transparency isn't perfect. It creates public tension, invites criticism, and sometimes costs players their peace. But it's progress. Because for the first time, players can shape their own narratives, not through agents, not through leaks, but through their own words. The modern battle isn't waged on the field. It's fought in the boardrooms, online threads, and the court of public opinion. It's a contest between image and integrity, between loyalty and leverage. And while the system still holds most of the power, the balance is shifting, inch by inch. Someday, the league might reach a point where transparency isn't rebellion, but routine. Where contracts are written in plain language, not coded traps. Where every player, drafted or not, superstar or practice squad, knows exactly what they're signing. But until that day, every tweet, every post, every shared truth is an act of quiet resistance. Because this new era of football isn't just about who plays hardest, it's about who dares to speak. And in a game built on silence, the courage to tell the truth might be the most revolutionary play of all. Every empire eventually faces its reckoning. In the NFL, that reckoning is financial, a collision between loyalty and leverage, between what players give and what they actually receive. For a century, the league's economy has run on contradiction, billion-dollar profits built on disposable labor. But today, the players are learning the rules behind the curtain. They're asking the forbidden questions, and in those questions lies the blueprint for the league's next great war, the fight for guaranteed money, equity, and truth. It starts with one undeniable fact. Football is the only major American sport where contracts can vanish overnight. In the NBA, guaranteed deals are standard. In Major League Baseball, they're the norm. But in the NFL, the most violent, physically destructive of them all, promises are written in sand. A career-ending injury can erase millions in an instant. And yet, year after year, the system survives on the illusion of security. That illusion is cracking. The numbers speak louder than any press release. In 2023, less than half of active NFL contracts were fully guaranteed. Even the biggest stars, players who define franchises, negotiate under ceilings that other sports wouldn't tolerate. Lamar Jackson's long public struggle to secure his own fully guaranteed deal wasn't just about ego. It was a mirror held up to the system itself. The league called his demand unrealistic. But when Deshaun Watson signed a $230 million fully guaranteed contract with Cleveland, a silent panic rippled through ownership circles. It wasn't about the player, it was about precedent. Because precedent is power. One guaranteed contract becomes a bargaining tool. Two become a movement. And movements terrify those who profit from imbalance. The fight for guaranteed money is more than financial, it's existential. Its players are realizing that control doesn't come from fame, it comes from certainty. From knowing that the years they trade their bodies for aren't erased by a spreadsheet. From knowing that if they give everything to the game won't discard them the moment they fall. But the future battle isn't just about guarantees, it's about equity. Ownership in the very system players build. For decades, the NFL structure has ensured that those who play the game never truly profit from its long-term growth. They get wages, not stakes, salaries, not shares. And yet, the modern athlete, the one who understands media, markets, and branding, is beginning to see through the old framework. In private conversations, some players have begun discussing something radical: collective investment. Equity stakes in the league itself. Imagine a future where players' pensions are tied not only to years of service, but to the league's growth, where they share in the profits of streaming rights, merchandising, and global expansion. The idea remains distant, but not impossible. In 2024, a handful of high-profile players, including Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson, invested in sports franchises outside the NFL, testing the boundaries of power once considered untouchable. That's the direction the next generation is watching. Ownership, not dependency. The recognition that influence lasts only when you have a seat at the table, not when you're refighting to stay in the room. Still, the path there is steep. The league's legal machinery is older and stronger than any player's voice. Every victory in transparency or compensation meets quiet resistance. New clauses, new language, new ways to reset the balance of power. But the players are learning faster than ever before. They understand the economics now. They've seen the cap games, the accounting illusions, the PR spin that defines the league's self-image. Social media was the beginning of exposure. Collective bargaining may be the future of revolution. The next CBA, whenever it arrives, will not be written in the same tone as the last. The players know what's at stake now: lifetime healthcare, guaranteed base salaries, and a fair share of the billions in revenue they create. They know that team culture cannot justify economic disparity forever. And what drives it isn't greed. It's survival. Because football is still what it's always been, a game that takes more than it gives back. A system where the average career lasts less than 3 seasons, where every snap could be the last one. In that reality, the demand for guaranteed money isn't arrogance, it's human. It's the pursuit of dignity inside a business that has long treated its labor as expendable. The future will also belong to those who understand visibility. Transparency is no longer rebellion, it's expectation. Players post injury updates, contract details, financial lessons. They build podcasts, documentaries, and brands that educate the next wave of athletes. The league can't suppress what's already public. And every time a player tells the truth about how deals really work, another illusion dies. But make no mistake, the NFL is not surrendering quietly. Teams have already begun restructuring incentive systems, increasing signing bonuses instead of guarantees, adding void years to reduce cap hits while keeping flexibility. The architecture of control evolves with every generation. It's a chess match without an endgame. What's changing is the awareness. The players entering the league now, the rookies, the undrafted, the journeymen, they're walking in with more knowledge than any generation before them. They know about termination pay. Oh, they know how non-guaranteed contracts can turn to dust. They know what it means to read the fine print before believing the dream. And that knowledge, that collective intelligence, is the league's new variable, one that no ownership group can fully contain. In the coming years, this tension will define football. Not the scores or the records, but the ongoing struggle between those who play and those who profit. And somewhere in between, in that narrow, contested space, the truth of the sport will emerge. Because what the NFL has always represented, at its core, is America itself, ambition and exploitation sharing the same field. The next era of the NFL will not be decided by a championship, but by a clause. By a paragraph buried deep in a contract. By a player who refuses to sign until the ink reflects fairness. The men who dare to fight for guarantees today may never see the system they're rebuilding for tomorrow. But their defiance will echo, reshaping the power dynamic of a billion-dollar empire. In the end, that's the paradox of football. A game built on teamwork that depends on individual sacrifice. And now, finally, those individuals are refusing to disappear quietly. They're fighting for permanence in a league that was never designed to grant it. The question isn't whether the NFL will change, it's whether it can afford not to. Because a system that profits from silence cannot survive in an age where truth travels faster than any pass, any run, any headline. The next generation won't settle for stories of loyalty. They'll settle for justice. They'll demand the kind of equity that honors the blood, the risk, and the years no contract can truly quantify. And someday, maybe soon, when a rookie steps onto that field, he'll know that the document he signs isn't a surrender, but a promise fulfilled. A contract not written in secrecy, but in light. That will be the moment the game finally keeps its word. There's a moment after the last whistle of the last game, when the field is empty but still alive. The lights hum faintly, the wind moves through torn confetti. And somewhere in the tunnels beneath the stadium, a man who once defined Sunday afternoons sits alone with his thoughts. His name might never be spoken again on air. His jersey might never be sold again. But the sound of his body breaking, the hits, the surgeries, the endless contract negotiations still echoes faintly in the walls of this game. This is the shadow that lingers long after fame fades. The shadow built not by the violence of football, but by the silence of its business. The NFL has always been a mirror held up to America, its hunger, its ambition, its capitalism. It is a place where greatness is measured by numbers, where loyalty has an expiration date, and where even legends can be erased by a single transaction. Beneath the roar of the crowd lies a quieter world, the world of contracts, of leverage, of unseen power. That is the true heartbeat of professional football, and it beats not for glory, but for control. When you strip away the spectacle, what remains is a system engineered to keep players in motion until they break. It's not cruelty in the obvious sense, not the open brutality of old collisions, but a calculated design. The fine print, the franchise tags, the non-guaranteed clauses. The rookie caps, they form a kind of architecture that looks fair on paper but functions as a trap in practice. And every season, hundreds of men step into that trap willingly because the dream burns brighter than the warning signs. You can feel that contradiction in every contract signed under the flash of cameras, a handshake hiding 1,000 contingencies. The promise of millions tethered to a single injury clause. The illusion of security undone by one line of conditional language. Behind every great signing day headline, there's a lawyer smiling quietly in the background, knowing how the story will really end. For every Tom Brady who mastered the system, there are hundreds who vanished inside it. For every guaranteed superstar, there are backups, journeymen, and rookies who learn too late that guaranteed doesn't mean safe, it just means temporary. The business doesn't mourn the fallen, it replaces them. The contract, in the end, outlives the man. And yet, there's a haunting beauty to this paradox. Because the same system that exploits players also immortalizes them. Their pain, their endurance, their fleeting dominance all become part of the myth that keeps fans watching. The game devours its creators, then builds shrines in their image. That's the cruel poetry of football. Every touchdown and broken body feeding the same legacy machine. When you look back on a century of this sport, you start to see the same story repeating itself under new names and new numbers. The reserve clause of the 1930s becomes the franchise tag of the 2000s, the strikes of 1987. Echo through today's collective bargaining debates. The rookies chasing first-round dreams are still signing away years of freedom for the chance to belong. History doesn't repeat, it rebrands. The shadow economy of football, built on contracts and compromise, is not just a financial structure, it's a moral one. It forces players to assign a dollar value to their pain, two-way risk against legacy, to gamble their bodies on promises that may never materialize. And while the league has evolved, more data, more transparency, more awareness, the central question remains unchanged. Who truly owns the game? The players who play it, or the league that defines the terms? Even the fans, in their devotion, become part of the machinery. We celebrate extensions, criticize holdouts, track cap space as if it were a moral measure. We judge a man's worth by his average annual value, forgetting that behind every team-friendly deal is a human being accepting less than he has earned, just to stay in the only world he's ever known. There's something deeply human and deeply tragic about that devotion. It's what gives the sport its emotional gravity. These men are not fools. They are dreamers, architects of fleeting glory, bound to a game that both blesses and betrays them. They understand the risks better than anyone. They just believe that, somehow, they'll be the exception. That their name will last. That their contract will hold. That the shadow won't find them. But it always does. Even in the league's brightest eras, the Super Bowl dynasties, the MVP seasons, the record-breaking contracts, the shadow moves quietly beneath. It's in the headlines that fade too quickly, the retirements that go unnoticed, the lawsuits filed years later when the cameras are gone. It's in the players' associations fighting for healthcare, the families of forgotten veterans, the statistics that tell you how few ever see their guaranteed millions. The shadow isn't evil, it's systemic. It's the cost of pretending that the game and the business are separate things. And perhaps the hardest truth of all is that we, the audience, crave the illusion. We want to believe in the purity of the sport, in the myth of fair play, in the idea that the best rise by merit alone. We don't want to look too closely at the contracts, the fine print, the corporate strategies that decide who stays and who disappears. To love the game fully is to accept its darkness, and that's a truth few are willing to confront. But the men who lived it, they know. They carry it in their bones, in the scars that don't show up on medical reports. They remember every conversation that ended with, "It's just business." They remember the phone calls that never came, the checks that bounced, the promises that dissolved the moment they were no longer useful. And yet, ask them if they'd do it again, and most would say yes, not because the system was fair, but because the dream was real, if only for a while. That's what makes this all so powerful, so heartbreaking, and so distinctly American. The NFL isn't just a sport. It is a reflection of how this country defines worth. It rewards resilience, punishes vulnerability, and measures success in contracts, not compassion. And still, men line up every year, knowing what waits for them, because some dreams are worth walking into the fire for. The final truth is simple but heavy. The NFL's shadow isn't an accident, it's a design. But the players, the men who break their bodies and silence their doubts, are not victims of that design. They are the reason it continues to exist. Every catch, every tackle, every new generation of players willing to chase the same promise ensures that the machine keeps turning. And maybe that's the only way the game survives. Through sacrifice, through belief, through men who know the cost and step onto the field anyway. When the last echoes fade from the stadium and the contracts are forgotten and the money is spent, what remains isn't the business, it's the story. The shadow may define the terms, but the players define the meaning. Their courage, their pain, their resilience, those are the true signatures beneath every deal ever made. And so the question lingers, quiet but eternal. Was it worth it? For some, the answer is yes, because for a fleeting moment, they stood in the light. For others, the answer doesn't matter anymore. But for all who ever played, the echo remains a whisper beneath the roar. A reminder that greatness and exploitation have always shared the same field. This is the NFL's truest contract, written not in ink, but in sacrifice.